Thank you very much. It was beautiful. I'd like to call on Ms. Gloria Jusky right now to make her opening remarks.
Good morning. On behalf of the Black Creek Pioneer Village and the British Home Children Advocacy and Research Association, I would like to welcome you all to this very special commemoration service. I would also like to thank our special guests and participants for taking the time to be here today. Don Cherry, George Beardshaw, Jim Brunel, New York Regional Police Mail Force, the ceremonial unit of the Missionaries Great Lakes, the White Heather Pipes and Drums, Carl Black, Marjorie Tolan, Glenna Walken, Jennifer Lane, the Base Boarding Cadets, my family, Paul Jackson and Megan Oshevsky, Don Houston for her help with our memorial plaque, and last but not least, my co-hosts for today, Karen Mahoney and Sandra Joyce. I would like to also extend a special thank you to Black Creek Pioneer Village for their support and their help. They were quick to recognize the historical importance to Canada and the impact of the child migration scheme. I personally have benefited from the experience of working with staff here who are absolutely dedicated to the village and the work they do to educate people of all ages of the early history of Canada. I get excited about the impact that Black Creek Pioneer Village is having on the youth of this country. There is simply no other venue where they can learn hands-on about pioneers, which until December 2015 will now include the British Home Children. So thank you so much for everything. This could not happen without you guys. We are here to honor the memory of our British Home Children who served in the First World War, many giving their lives fighting for freedom and for Canada. Between 1869 and 1949, over 118,000 children of all ages were brought from the United Kingdom to Canada to be used as indentured farm workers and domestics. All of them, for a variety of reasons, were separated from their families, their friends, their country, and their cultures. These children faced uncertain futures here in Canada. Some were fortunate enough to be placed with families who cared for them well, however, many of them were not. Many home children found themselves abandoned to new lives which were worse than old. When the First World War broke out, our British home children answered the country's call. By the 2nd of April 1917, over 7,000 homeboys had enlisted. We estimate that in total, approximately 10,000 of our British home children enlisted in the war. When you stop to consider just how many children had been sent to Canada by this time, and how many were actually eligible to enlist, this number represents an almost 100% enlistment rate. Of the boys who enlisted, there is one story that continues to inspire. I first came across the story of Arthur Clarkson in a newspaper article detailing the horrific abuse he had suffered. The headline of the story read, "Worse than old slave days." Of his many injuries, the frostbite suffered to his feet, initially both considered for amputation, deformed them and caused him pain for the rest of his life. And yet those feet carried Arthur to the enlistment office in 1916, where he joined the Canadian Army Signal Corps to serve for this country. After his service, Arthur married British home child Lily Wood, eventually settling in the United States of America. Together, with courage and strength, they overcame their terrible beginnings and lovingly raised their family together. Today, we welcome his daughter Linda and his family to Canada and to this service. This past year, our organization, with the help of many dedicated members, has been compiling a detailed list of the home children who perished in the war. The listing of boys was compiled and researched with the help of Carrie Snow, Jennifer Lane, Marjorie Coley, John Sayers, Carol Black, Donna Crawford, and myself. Our head researcher for this project, Jennifer Lane, has given selflessly over the past year with outstanding dedication to this project. The Lane family also joins us here today, and I would like to extend our sincerest appreciation to them for the time taken from their family life and for the help given to Jennifer and all your support this past year. You must be as proud of her as she is of you. The enlistment couldn't have been done without you, Jennifer. The enlistment papers from our home children are distinctive in their sadness. Often under next of kin, the word unknown appears or a friend is listed. Their birth dates are more often incorrect than correct, and sometimes simply listed as unknown. Of these enlistments, we have identified 1,035 British home children who lost their lives as a result of the war. The most common death date on this list is April the 9th of 1917, which is the first day of the Battle of Winter Ridge. It is unclear how many home children fought in this battle, which united Canada as a nation, but we do know that we had a strong presence there. In fact, Vimy Ridge's last surviving infantryman was Charles Reaper, a warrior homeboy from Scotland. Charles died in 2003 at 103 years of age. We have also identified 119 names of British home children on the Vimy Memorial. Today there are an estimated 3 to 4 million descendants of British home children in this country. They are an intrinsic part of the fabric of our nation, yet their existence and contribution is a part of our national history which has remained relatively unknown. As an organization, we are determined to make sure that their story becomes an official part of our national history and will not be forgotten. By remembering their contribution to this country means remembering the 1,035 of those home children who died out of the 10,000 who enlisted. Many of our home children who perished in the First World War had nobody to mourn their loss, nobody to realize they were not coming back home. There was nobody to miss them. Many times their family back in the UK were not even notified of their death. Today, our organization works towards reuniting these children to their families and giving them the rightful place, not only in the history of this country, but in their very own family histories. It is the hope of our organization that the contributions of our British home children to our country as nation builders and protectors will be recognized nationally and become part of our school curriculum, lest we forget.
Major Chaplain, members of the British Home Child Advocacy and Research Association, guests, Mr. Cherry, Mr. Beardshaw, Mrs. Beardshaw, my colleagues from the Canadian Forces, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and privilege to be with you here today at Black Creek Pioneer Village to honor and commemorate the Canadian British home children who fought with the Allied forces in World War I. I would like to thank the British Home Children Advocacy and Research Association of Canada for the kind invitation to attend this commemoration today. And I would like to single out its CEO, Lori Shevsky, and Sandra Joyce, the Executive Director, who have worked so hard during the past decade or so to give our British home children and our ancestors a voice. Many others in the audience, and they were mentioned this morning, have given countless hours in service so that the stories of our British home children are recorded and told, and that these untold stories may become the stories of our country's history and heritage. For far too long, these stories have been hidden from our eyes and ears. But it's folks like you who have given our ancestors a voice, and who are making sure that their stories, the good and the bad, are recorded for posterity. When I reflect for just a moment on my British home child connection, I think of my paternal grandmother, Mary Scott Pearson, a And I think of all the untold stories that were forever locked from her family and friends. However, I also think of the golden opportunity that landed on my plate in 2011, when I was able to shepherd a private member's bill through the Ontario Legislature proclaiming September 28th in each year as British Home Child Day in Ontario. With private members' bills being very difficult to pass, third reading in the legislature, I knew that I had to find some strong allies from the opposition benches. To say the least, I was honored and proud to have NDP Sherry DeNovo and Conservative Steve Clark co-sponsor the bill and to have it unanimously passed on May 19, 2011, when some of you were in the legislature. How proud we were to have September 28, 2011 as Ontario's first British Home Child Day. Now, getting back to today's commemorative event, honoring those brave British home children of Canada who stood up in defense of their homeland of birth and their adopted homeland, Canada. Today, I wish to single out one of these brave soldiers, and a soldier who received the British Empire's most distinguished medal, the Victoria Cross. Ladies and gentlemen, I speak of Sergeant Claude J. Nunny, whose story is told by Stormont-Glendaskingary historian, the late John Graham Harkness, KC, in his book, History of Stormont-Glendaskingary. Harkness writes, and I quote, "Among the rank and file from these counties who served with distinction in World War I, there is one with outstanding service, and the most highly decorated man ever to serve these counties. He is Sergeant Claude J.P. Nunny, Victoria Cross, Distinguished Conduct Medal, Military Medal of Lancaster, Glengarry County, in Eastern Ontario. Coming from England as a boy, he made his home at Lancaster and served prior to 1914 with the 59th Regiment of the Counties. He enlisted early in World War I and served in France with the 38th Ottawa Battalion, Canadian Expeditionary Force. He died of severe wounds received in action, for which he was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest award in the British Empire." End of quote. The London Gazette of December 13, 1918, had this to say about the fearless example set by Claude Nunny on September 2, 1918, and again I quote, "During the attack on September 2nd, his dash continually placed him in advance of his companions, and his fearless example undoubtedly helped greatly to carry the company forward to its objectives. When his battalion, which was preparing to advance, was heavily counterattacked by the enemy, Private Nunny, on his own initiative, went forward through the barrage to the company outpost lines, going from post to post and encouraging the men by his own fearless example." End of quote. About 2 months ago, in the Sergeant's Mess at the Cornwall Armories, when asked to make a presentation to the grade 12 students in Cornwall Collegiate Vocational School in Cornwall, I shared with them the mistaken identity of Claude Nunny, an identity that was lost for many, many years. I told them that there had been some debate as to Nunny's origins, as has been the case with many with lost identity from the ranks of our British home children. While Nunny himself stated that he was born in Dublin, Ireland, it has been proven that he was actually born in Hastings, England, as Stephen Sergeant Claude Nunny. As well, it has been proven that Nunny did not become a Canadian citizen by the naturalization process, but by becoming part of the child immigration scheme known as the British Home Children. When reflecting on this mistaken identity of Sergeant Claude Nunny, Dave Laurenti of Home Children Canada wrote, and I'd like to quote Dave, and I had many opportunities to meet Dave in my life, and this is what he had to say. "It is interesting to speculate how Claude Nunny would answer were he alive today and asked to give his first names, his date of birth, and birthplace, because for some unknown reason or reasons, he unknowingly or unwittingly gave false information when he joined up in World War I. Perhaps it was because, like so many other home children, he had lost his baptismal record and or birth certificate. His birth certificate shows he was actually born in Hastings, England, not in Dublin, as his military attestation paper shows. Nor was he Irish, and his name was not Claude Joseph Patrick Nunny, as he stated, but Stephen Sergeant Claude Nunny, the sergeant being his mother's maiden name. His birth date was also wrong, and he came to Canada as Stephen, not Claude. All that said, none of it detracts in any way from the brave things he did during World War I, when he became one of Canada's Magnificent Seven, and won the former Empire and Commonwealth's highest award for bravery in the ranks. End of quote. Just before concluding my remarks today, I would like to reflect on another piece of the Claude Nunny story, a bit of history that may have become evident as I outline his story to you here today. All of you have heard my reflections on Sergeant Claude Nunny, but I wonder how many of you picked up the reference to Private Nunny in the London Gazette article that I quoted of December 1918. I had said this: Private Nunny, on his own initiative, went forward through the barrage to the company outpost line, going from post to post and encouraging men by his own fearless example. You see, although Sergeant Nunny had received the Distinguished Conduct Medal, it was Sergeant Nunny, and it was Sergeant Nunny prior to 1918. He had been demoted to a private prior to September 2nd, 1918, for conduct infractions. His fearless conduct and leadership while under enemy attack on that September day was enough for military officials to return his sergeant rank 16 days after receiving what proved to be mortal wounds. He was only 25 years of age. As for Sergeant Nunny's decorations, they came into the possession of Mrs. Peter McLaren of Lancaster, with whom Sergeant Nunny resided for a time prior to enlistment. Mrs. McLaren finally consented to having them placed in the sergeant's mess of the SPG Highlanders Regiment at the Formal Armies for safekeeping, together with a photograph of Sergeant Nunny in the uniform of the old 59th Regiment. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Honorary Lieutenant Colonel of the Stormont and West and Glengarry Highlanders Regiment, and a Director of the Ontario East British Home Child family, it is my honor and privilege to be with you today as we remember and honor the brave British home children who took up arms in defense of Canada a century ago. May I encourage future generations to keep the stories of these brave soldiers and all our British home children ancestors in the forefront, in the minds of Canadian citizens, and in the history books of our classrooms. These are the stories that have made our country the envy of many, so we must never forget where we came from, even if the stories of our ancestors have been hidden or lost through time. Congratulations to the British Home Children Advocacy and Research Association for a job well done here today. And as the battle cry of the Glens, up the Glens. Thank you.
I'm not used to making speeches. I made one in Toronto a couple of years ago. It's one of the whole bunch of Dutch. They said my speech was too long. And that is just listening to the approval of the side. Anyway, British home children, I will say this for the British home children. I've written any gun, but I all my men. I came over here when I was 14 and a half. I had one brother already over here in 1934. I came over here in 1938. And I was in school and the inspector said, how did you fix the practical? I was thinking about the wheat fields and I noticed John about cowboys. I'd like to go to Canada and be a cowboy, but I was a cowboy on the right behind the picture there. I should be talking like this over, but I'm an army boy. I'm 91 years old. The best thing that ever happened to me when I joined the Canadian Army because when I was in the hole, I worked with a farmer. I came from Great Britain to a place called Edinburgh, which is south of Queensland. Well, all those guys back in them days, we all worked on it. We didn't have horses, not too many tractors around. I was used to cross toilet, all that kind of stuff back over there. Used barn. You know, things have changed in Canada since I was actually, because I go to Toronto, I use Toronto. I don't really try to Toronto. It doesn't go over so big. When I joined the Army, I joined the best regiment. I joined the Queensland Rifles of Toronto. Queensland Rifles of Toronto. And last, I was with Charlie Martin. All good. Charlie Martin was the most decorated NCO in San Diego. It's the only guy who's got the destination go on the regiment, reach the destination as to where we were supposed to go on the edge. But we did. Our regiment, as you can tell, I'm not up to the difference. Comes off the top like that. Oh, being a banana boy, I'm sure that I came to Canada. Canada is one great country. I tell you, I love Canada. Thank you, Canada, was been so good to me. I'd like to say more, but it takes forever. I'm not going to say it.
The military and the police, they're the best in the world, that's for sure. What a great job you did. Not only that, you look sharp too. That's a good thing. Look sharp. George, you should be on Coach's Corner. Man, did a great job. I'm going to try to get on Coach's Corner till 91 too. CDC's not too happy about that. Well, I'm very happy to be here for my grandfather, Richard Palamountain. He was at Denny, and he was a British home child, and I didn't know this, to tell you the truth. Not many people do know it, but when I went over and I did a show called Who Do You Think You Are, and that's when I found out that his father died and his mother became hard times and that, and he was sent over at 12 years old with his sisters and that. But 12 years old, I'm glad you're getting on a ship. You're 12 years old, not home to Canada, and your parents, I remember I was away to play hockey at 16. I was waiting for my parents. I was absolutely sick. My stomach. I think that they had to get on a sailing ship and came over. He landed in all places, and he went to Quebec. I don't know how he got out, but anyhow. It was funny when I went over to Afghanistan, the Bandoos were over there, all teams, players, and so my son said, you don't have to worry about the Taliban, you better worry about the Bandoos getting over there. That's where they treated me well. And no, I read up on it now and talked about arts and let's lay the cards on the table here that they were slaves. They really were slaves. If you read the stories on it, there was a few that were treated right. My grandfather, he went from Quebec to the Royal Military College, and he was a horse groomer, and he awarded his First World War. He was 31 years old and with the family, so he didn't have to go, but he did. And he was mounted over there. And like I said, he was at Denny. So I was very proud to come here and to think that it must have been a tough bunch with George, 91. That's at their ages when they died. They're all 91. I guess that's if they survived. Some of them moved 20 places when they could live. And they were treated like slaves. And let's lay the card on the table. and maybe I shouldn't say this, but we never knew about it because they were British. If there were anything else, they would be up in arms. It would be a thing in Canada and the whole deal in the House of Parliament, how bad they were treated. But because they were British, we just passed it off. So I have to say that, and I know it's not popular. That's for me. And I want to thank everybody for having me here. Enjoyed everybody, and Sandra kept at me all the time. I get emails every week from Sandra, you better be there. She was even bothering me in the playoffs. I said, well, my wife, tell her I'll be there, so you leave me alone. Over last night. Anyhow, I'm very happy and I'm very honored to be here. And let me tell you, those British Empire children must have been pretty tough at George, and that's why they survived George, and you're the best. Thank you very much for having me.
They shall not grow old, as they that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years in them. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
came over with the Barnardo Party. He also served in World War I. He was one of the ones that had a very rough time here in Canada. He never received that little medal or the paycheck. He left and joined the military. He ended up at the 35th Battalion, Queen's Own Rifles. He was actually with them as well. And he served, Queen's York Rangers. They saw action in places like the Somme, Arras, Finney, Kilseveny, Passchendaele, Amiens, and Flanders. During one of these battles, he did receive mustard gas burns and wore the scar for the rest of his life. We were always under the impression, too, that he was an only child, but it turns out that he had a brother who was with the British forces killed in action in 1918 at the age of 19. We often wonder if they ever crossed paths, but we doubt it very much. The poem that I'm about to read was written by a 17-year-old, and it was his friend that died. My grandfather was one of the lucky ones that did make it back to Canada, but Will Nash was not. Will Nash came out from England's shores, and down Spring Hill did roam. He went to Edward Jackson's place and called it home sweet home. But he was just a young lad then, and when he grew tall, he did not know of his native home, nor thought of it at all. He saw the war clouds growing dark, and when they grew too dense, he started out to do his bit for homeland's defense. Of course he drilled, as usual, here and in England too. Then he went to France to try his luck, as many more boys do. He fought in trenches side by side with boys he'd always known. They saw him get the fatal fall that killed him dead as stone. Some folks may sing of mighty men who do things great and brave. They did no more than Private Nash and ended in the grave. He had no relatives at all to mourn the deed just done, but Edward Jackson and his wife, they mourned him like a son. For they had grown to love him well since he was just a boy. The only parents that he knew, they were his pride and joy. A service to his memory in Havelock Church was made, for folks remembered what he'd done and of the price he paid. His name is on the honor roll where king and council sit. All honor then to poor Will Nash, who did his little bit.
Good morning. This is a letter that Herbert sent back from England. He was a member of the 48 Highlanders. He came to Canada through the Fagan Homes, and when the war broke out, he signed up. Herbert was injured at Hill 70, therefore he is back in London when he writes this letter, and it's dated 1916. Dear Walt and Mary, you're most welcome to hand, and we're sorry to hear about Mrs. Haynes' father and mother. I expect to go back to France again soon. I guess that will mean another winter in the trenches. Although I do not want to go back there again, but I guess it's my duty to go back there again. So Liv is going strong. Again, tell her it will be a long time before the twins will be called up. As they say, the first 7 years is the worst, but every other 13 year after. Say, Walt, Arthur must be a good man, as he must have been with you nearly 2 years now. I guess he has got no notion of joining up. If he has, I will let him take my place, as I have seen all I want to see of the war. Say, Walt, Colonel Whaling's niece is a nurse at this hospital. We often talk about good old Sharon and Newmarket, and believe me, I get some digs at you about Sharon Town. I have lots of fun these days. I have a different girl every day. Say, Walt, must tell you of a little experience of mine. We met 2 girls the other night, one of the fellows and myself. As you know, nearly all the lights are out here at night. Well, we met the girls in the dark and took them home, and we were saying such sweet, nice, loving words to them, and we had quite a few kisses in brackets. It makes me blush when I think of it. Well, as I said, before we took them home, and we promised to meet them on the following afternoon, which was a Sunday, something happened to the other fella who could not get out. So off goes Private H. Blackhall to meet them himself. I had to take a bus to get there. I arrived at the place where I was supposed to meet them, when who should come up but a woman of about 40, and said to me, "Was you the soldier I was with last night?" I looked at her and I recognized her by the hat she was wearing, and I said to myself, I will see the girl's face next time before I go out with another girl. Well, to finish my story, I did not know what to do after she asked me if I was the soldier she was without last night. When to my relief, I saw the bus coming down the street, and I ran as fast as I could, as I was wearing a splint on my leg at the time, and I was running stiff-legged, and the people in the street were laughing at me the way I ran. I did not care as long as I got away from that old woman. But when I got on the bus again, I had to laugh at myself. I send my best regards to Isla and Edith and all who know me around Sharon, not forgetting Mr. and Mrs. Charles Haynes. I guess I will have to stop, as you will not have time to read this. I remain yours sincerely, H.G. Blackall. Herbert was killed at the Battle of Passchendaele in 1917.
Left with no other choice, after the men were killed or seriously injured and rendered incapable to provide for their families, many British women had to surrender their children to institutions after the First World War. My shell-shocked grandfather was unable to work in the mines anymore, and my grandmother could not go on her own. Their boys were brought to the orphan homes of Scotland. They were sent to Canada a few years later as British home children. The excerpt I'm about to read is adapted from The Street Arrow, a book I wrote based on the circumstances of my father's life. Wait a minute. This one's alive. He's a Tommy. Let's get the poor guy out of there. William was lying under a dead German in a ton of dry clay. They rolled the German away, and water was splashed onto William's face to revive him, and then a cup was held to his mouth while two others cleared his body of the clay, using the butts of their guns and their helmets. "Are you all right, fella? Does anything feel broken?" No answer. "Look at his lip. He's chewed it raw. But all this dried blood on him can't be from that. It must be from the German. I wonder how long he's been lying like that. Did you see the look in his eyes? What do you mean?" They call it the 1,000-yard stare. They picked him up and laid him on the stretcher. And William thought he really must be in heaven, his body suddenly feeling lighter than air. "Don't worry, we'll have you out of here in a jiffy." The words echoed around William, and he wasn't sure if they were really speaking to him. The Canadian soldiers waited with him until their stretcher bearers carried them to their doctor, who felt his limbs all over for breaks and then helped him get to his feet. William's knees buckled instantly. "Where did you find him?" he asked the stretcher bearers. "He was lying in one of the trenches, buried under clay, and a dead German must have been there all night." "What regiment are you from, soldier? What has happened to your pals?" The doctor, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, tenderly wiped William's face clean. He stitched the gash in his lip, quickly rinsing it with some clean water, and then held some strong liquid to his mouth. He spoke quietly to him. "You need some rest." But William's eyes didn't register anything. Dr. McCrae looked around for a piece of paper and then tore a page out of his own personal notebook that had some space on one side. He wrote shell shock on it and pinned it to him. "I'm not sure if he can see or hear us, Harry. Take him over to his own." William was carried over to the British medical tent. Sent back to England to recover, William James was the first patient to arrive at the clinic. How fragile his body looked, yet only his lip was scarred. Nurse Doreen saw he was one of those who didn't speak, except for his nightly indecipherable cries. As she looked into the distance in his eyes, she knew his road to recovery wasn't going to be easy on either of them. A torn out notebook page, creased and stained with blood, fluttered from his clothes to the floor. On one side, the word shell shock had been written. On the other side, there were handwritten lines. It looked like a poem. The title was, In Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row that mark our place. And in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, spelled dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe to you, from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Nurse Doreen held a piece of paper to her heart. What he must have gone through to write something like that. That night, the pale ghost, lurching and limping through William's nightmares, visited him and he cried out. Nurse Doreen hurried to him, and administered a sedative. For a while, the pale images were still there in William's mind, surrounded by green, choking fog, lit up from behind by grinning flamethrowers. There was a gurgle in their throats, and a loud sucking noise as though stuck into quicksand like mud, trying to pull themselves out. When the shells started falling all around them, their screams and cries were muffled. The soldiers in his nightmare came closer to him. First there were tens of them, then hundreds, and finally the whole field was moving and swaying as wave upon wave got up from their eternal beds in no man's land. They looked at him with hollowed eyes and shook their fists. They yelled at him, "Lily-livered coward, get back here and fight." Then the drugs started to take effect, and William's face relaxed, and his eyes closed. But the specters were stronger than the medicine. And although they were not threatening him anymore, they were still there, lurking in the background, watching him, shaking their heads. One of them, the Canadian doctor he remembered vaguely from the front, looked at him sadly. "I told you, we shall not sleep." On November the 11th, 1918, the war to end all wars was over. Ceasefire went into effect at 11 o'clock on the 11th day of the 11th month. Yet at 2 minutes to 11 on November the 11th, a German sniper took aim and fired at a young Canadian who had already begun celebrating the end of the war. 120 seconds between being a casualty of the war and murder. At the shot, the Canucks comrades who had stayed low in the trenches checked their watches. At 11, a cheer rose from the surrounding area, but it was too late for the 21-year-old. Not knowing, his family and friends back in Canada hit hip hurrah, slapping each other on the back. Everyone toasted the King, Great Britain, and Canada, except the dead boy's mother, whose glass of wine had inexplicably slipped out of hand. Because of the First World War, my British home child's father and his brother were separated, never to see each other again. Their older sister remained in Scotland. Their family was forever torn apart. Now I'd like to call upon Marjorie Foley, author of The Golden Bridge, to speak of the First World War Roll of Honor plaque, after which Jennifer Lane and Gloria Chesky will officially unveil it.
Some time ago, I began to protest researching soldiers who had served in World War I. We are here today to unveil a plaque in commemoration of the soldiers who gave their lives in our conflict. These children have become my children. Each time I see your name appear. And each time I see your name appear in the casualty list, it breaks my heart. But I think I can do no better than to turn to the words of George Willard Smart, who was the inspector of British immigrant children and receiving homes from 1900 to 1939. In his annual report on March 18, 1918, he reported that 9,875 boys, home children, had joined up. He stated that large numbers of young men were flocking to the colors, many of them already having made the supreme sacrifice, their bodies lying in the fields of France and Flanders, while their companions, with some indomitable courage, were marching on to final victory. The following year, he wrote, "The testing time arrived sooner than the people of this country could have expected. It is now known that practically every boy of military age and physical fitness who has been brought to this country by the societies from their own training homes and the state schools voluntarily enlisted to serve in the Great War. It is, besides, a satisfaction to the communities from which these children come to realize that the conditions of life in this country, together with their previous training, have brought about such commendable and permanent results, not only in their own lives, but in that of this nation." The plaque we are about to unveil is based on the design of an original World War I memorial plaque, which was awarded to the next of kin of Cecil Fenn. Cecil came to Canada with Bernardo Home in 1905. When he enlisted, Cecil claimed he had no kin, but he instead listed the name of Mr. Ben Johnstone of Peterborough, Ontario. Mr. Johnstone, who had taken Cecil in, treated him as family, and had also given him an education. Cecil was killed in action on April the 9th, 1917, at the Battle of Quincy Ridge. The plaque was funded by home child descendant and World War II veteran Len Brown in memory of his mother, Miriam Ann Morris, who came to Canada with Bernardo's in 1906. Jennifer Lord will now unveil the plaque.
Cadets bring the plaque forward for us, please.
I invite you to join me in prayer. Divine Creator, we thank you for the gift of this day, for the freedom hard-won, which allows us to remember and celebrate. We remember those who in so many ways have made this day possible. As we commemorate the war to end all wars, we ask you to bless our remembrance especially of the British home children, those who served and those who perished. Bless this monument, that their memory may be kept alive and treasured for their gift to our today and our country's tomorrow. Bless all of us here gathered. May we all be ambassadors for peace and for respect for all people. We know that the end to war lies in remembrance. Help us never to forget. Amen.
I'm Laurie Olszewski. I am the CEO and the founder of the British Home Children Advocacy and Research Association. This past year, in partnership with the Black Creek Pioneer Village in Toronto, we have worked together to create a display here for the British Home Children. The British Home Children were about 118,000 children that were immigrated into Canada from the UK between the years of 1869 and 1949. These children were not welcomed into families. They were here to be used as domestic servants, farmhands, and domestics in our households. The display at the Black Creek Pioneer Village will be open until December of 2015. So we invite everybody who is a descendant of a home child or people that maybe think that maybe they might have a home child in their family. We'd like to see you all come out and enjoy this exhibit and learn about the British Home Children.